fair because you had a real dog and pony show going on with both Democrats and Republicans walking the fairgrounds trying to act like regular people. Bernie Sanders even trying to act like a regular person. And, I thought somehow that he was just some creation out of a laboratory and they wound him up in the morning and let him walk around and he spouted off, "Workers of the world unite." So you had people like Sanders who happened to be there over the course of the weekend. There was an interview done on CNN, and they were interviewing the governor of Ohio, John Kasich, who's an old friend of Governor Butch Otter. I mentioned in the last hour that Otter claims to be a devout Catholic, yet will not investigate Planned Parenthood in Idaho. Kasich used to be a Roman Catholic. Then Kasich left the church. Then Kasich said all denominations are the same. Then Kasich joined the very liberal Anglican Communion and is now an Anglican, sort of. And Kasich was telling CNN during the course of a conversation that he doesn't need the Bible to make judgments in his life. He says some choices are obvious without it. Take a listen.
Why would we want to lock a schizophrenic or a bipolar person in a prison cell? That's not what America is. I don't read a Bible to figure out what I think, but I have a heart for people who, and look, I don't question anybody else's, but I just have a heart for people who have been disabled or disadvantaged, and I care about them.
And I think we need amnesty for illegal aliens. I've got a bunch of big donors over here from Wall Street. They're off camera, and that's what they'd like. So I think it's compassionate that we turn the country over to these people. I don't care if you're unemployed or not. I'm going to work with the Democrats, and we'll just print more money, and we'll give it to you. How's that? 914, Bill Colley with you. This guy Kasich, is not a conservative. Now, you've got people in establishment media who are trying to tell you that. In other words, they do this every 4 years. They come out and they say, oh, he's the level-headed Republican. In other words, he's the most like us. Here's who we think you Republicans should vote for, and then we can knock them down in the general election and get the candidate we actually want, which is one of our own fellow travelers. In fact, Mark Halperin, who's, I think he's an editor, was it at Newsweek? Well, that doesn't really exist any longer, but Mark Halperin was appearing on Face the Nation over at the Columbia Broadcast System, known as CBS. And Mark Halperin essentially says exactly what a lot of us have known about John Kasich. He's this cycle's John Huntsman.
He's the media's favorite candidate, and that is a dirty little secret that it is a big benefit. George Bush was the media's favorite candidate in 2000. McCain was for a time. When you're the media's favorite candidate, you do well.
And any Republican
You think?
Oh, yeah.
So they're trying to pick the candidate for the Republican Party again, as they did in 2012, as they did in 2008. And what happened in those two campaigns? Well, absolute disaster for the Republican Party. And now they're saying, hey, this John Kasich seems like a really good guy. He doesn't use the Bible at all and says all denominations are the same. And, you just got to let prisoners out of prison to be compassionate. And you've got to let illegal aliens into this country to be compassionate. And he's just like my favorite uncle in the Democrat Party. Yes, he is. And I think you need to nominate him. And then, of course, once he gets the nomination, it will start. And that will be, well, he's mean-spirited. He thinks the 40% or 47% of the country are leeches. And all of that stuff will come out. And then it'll be like, oh, war on women. And, why not vote for Hillary? After all, she only divulged secrets to our enemies. She's a much better candidate, don't you know? 9:15, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Speaking of the Dragon Lady, according to the Daily Caller, Hillary Clinton's email scandal should disqualify her from the Oval Office. At least so says former CIA operative and CNN national security analyst Bob Baer. Now, Baer, according to this story, is not known as a political partisan. After all, he works over at the Clinton News Network, CNN. Quote, seriously, if I had sent a document like this over the open internet, I'd get fired the same day, escorted to the door, and gone for good, and probably charged with mishandling classified information, unquote, Baer said. Quote, if this, in fact, were on her handheld, and he means her phone, was sent to her or she forwarded it in any way, I wonder whether she is capable of being president, unquote, he added. Meanwhile, you've got a Marine who saved the lives of some of his men, a captain in the Marine Corps, saved the lives of some of his men in Afghanistan because he sent out an email related to some terrorist activity in his sector, and there's talk about him being court-martialed. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton is supposedly going to be your next president. You figure it out. Why does she get a pass when other decent, honest Americans don't? 917. Ross Douthat is the way that's pronounced on the Rush Limbaugh program. I hear the name otherwise as Dothat. Conservative columnist at the New York Times, and no, that's not an oxymoron. They have one. Hillary Clinton's got this, he writes, and he goes on to say, she's going to win the nomination, and it isn't going to be close. First and foremost, he says, she's going to win because she only needs Democrats to win, and they still like her a lot. I don't care that she sold our country secrets to the Chinese and the Russians and they might destroy us. She's a woman, and we need a woman president, because if we had a man, he would conduct a war on women, see? And so if we have a woman, she'll understand my menstruation, and that'll save the country. The anti-Hillary bloc, he writes, is overrepresented in states like Iowa and New Hampshire, where Sanders' poll numbers are robust, but it isn't the basis for a winning coalition, not even close. And none, he writes, of Hillary's possible rivals, real and hypothetical, are well suited to building that kind of coalition. Sanders is enduring left-on-left clashes with Black Lives Matter, likely, by the way, spurred on by Hillary Clinton. And the hapless Martin O'Malley, he writes, is associated with Baltimore policing. Apparently that's not a good thing to be associated with, especially when the mayor there, Martin O'Malley's protege, tells the police to stand back and let the looting move on. And then the columnist says, absent an indictment, or I suppose an email showing her deliberately accepting payola from Putin, the email affair, no less than the shady Clinton Foundation dealings, looks like the kind of scandal that Clinton supporters have long conditioned themselves to justify. Well, she may have broken the law, but she's a woman, and her husband's a philanderer, and so she deserves it for that reason. And Planned Parenthood is good, and chopping up little babies, and she'll make sure that continues, and the country will be great again, because she'll ensure that every little boy has a bowl of oatmeal every morning, and every little girl has a dolly in her basket. Yeah. And then America will be, well, it'll get its comeuppance, of course, because it's a bad country, but Hillary will be there to give everyone a paddling, and then it'll all be better. Coming up on 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. There is no liberal mindset. There's vacancy. There's nothing going on between those ears. It's like a big, giant, empty gourd in every liberal's head. 66. I've got more coming up. In fact, if we get a chance, maybe I'll share with you some of the comments about Trey Gowdy about the Dragon Lady. And again, in any normal situation, you keep hearing, no justice, no peace. Well, if there was justice, Hillary Clinton would be locked away for the rest of her life. A couple of things to share with you that Clinton's people are right now negotiating with Trey Gowdy's committee, congressional committee, and the committee was really set up to look into Benghazi, where 4 Americans were tortured and killed, while Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama called off the rescue effort. I know that to be a fact because I worked with a radio consultant named John Lund, who was also the consultant to Armed Forces Radio, and John Lund happened to be at a base in Sicily, and they were getting ready to take off with a rescue mission when the White House, a couple of people at the White House made a decision that, never mind. You know, if they want to impale our ambassador and then drag his body through the streets and burn him and break his bones, well, you know what? This is a liberation movement. We can't get in the way of that, now can we? And America's bad, so he represents bad America, so we have to do it. 9:25. So they called off the rescue effort. I know this because John was there and he was talking to the officers who were ready to go in and actually rescue those 4 Americans. And these people back in the White House Situation Room just sat there and watched it all go down. I don't know if they had popcorn and they were like, as they were enjoying it as these fellow Americans were tortured. 9:25. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. You can reach the program by dialing us up at 736-0300, Trey Gowdy taking quite a bite out of Hillary Clinton. May not mean much, of course, because of all of her media allies.
It was one of the most reckless decisions that have been made in public service in a long time. And the notion that she did this for convenience, convenient for whom? Because it sure as hell hasn't turned out to be convenient for the American people or for our intelligence apparatus.
Now, who gets to negotiate an appearance before Congress? She is now a private citizen, right? And she wants to negotiate an appearance before she testifies before his committee about her abuse of the email system. That is, her own private server, which, of course, likely was being hacked by the Chinese and the Russians, and who knows, ISIS, the Iranians, Syria, anybody, all these bad apples out there could well have been taking a look at what was going on and definitely compromise American safety and security. And again, he has to negotiate with her staff.
We have agreed on the date, and the ground rules are simple. You're going to stay there until all of the questions are asked and answered with respect to Benghazi and Libya. And part of that is ensuring that the public record is whole and complete, which means we necessarily have to discuss your unusual email practices.
I think that a lot of this simply comes down to the fact that a lot of the women in comfortable shoes and other fellow travelers will vote for her because, regardless, they look at her, and if you're a liberal woman and you want to kill your baby, she's your best bet, right? So you're going to go along and you're going to support her because the economy and national security and all of those things are irrelevant. If you can't kill your own children, then by God, why have a life, right, of your own? And I'm sure that that's what a great many of them are thinking out there. Trey Gowdy, speaking to Fox News, says that he does believe that Mrs. Clinton is about the shadiest character he's ever come across.
I know this. It was a very unusual email arrangement she had with herself. Most of the explanations she's given for why she did it have been proven to be demonstrably false.
Yep.
And her decision to handle her email in this way has delayed our ability to do our job with respect to Benghazi, and it remains to be seen whether or not she's placed national security information at risk.
Why don't we just say it? She's a lying sack of excrement. 928, you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Yes, good morning, Bill. One of the reasons why nothing is getting done is because basically we're down to a one-party system. There's no difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party because they're all going after the Latino vote to keep them in power. They're not going to go after one another the way they should.
And today we'll have a vote on defunding Planned Parenthood, and it'll go down in flames. And then they'll wonder why someone like Donald Trump is leading in the polls, and they'll sit back and they'll wring their hands, and they'll never look in the mirror and say it's because we've lied to our own constituents.
Absolutely.
Thank you much for the call, sir. Coming up on 9:30, Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And these elites don't care. They keep thinking, well, it won't matter. We'll still be in power in a couple of years from now. Doesn't matter that the public's angry. Doesn't matter that they're picking up their pitchforks because you know what? We've got the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and the Marine Corps and the police, and what we'll do is if they get really unruly is we'll just shoot them. That's what they've got in mind for you, right? And then they come out on Election Day and say, we'll work for you. In fact, we've got a program for you. Unless, of course, Wall Street has something else in mind, and then we'll have to work on that first. You're at the bottom of the list, but don't worry about it. Oh, no, by the way, here's a picture of Ronald Reagan. I liked Ronald Reagan. You liked him too, didn't you? Vote for me. Bill Colley with you until, 10 o'clock this morning, and then Rush Limbaugh to warm things. I'm just the warm-up act. But I hope you can stick around because usually in that 3 hours, if you think that I've been a little scathing, believe me, he'll pin back a few ears. Also coming up, Hillary Clinton talking about her tuition plan for colleges, basically to enrich all of her academic pals, her fellow travelers. It's not about educating your kids, after all, right? It's about inculcating them in the socialist experiment and also making sure that the professors walk away with more and more of your tax dollars. That and should idiots be allowed to vote on the way.